Hello guys, welcome back. Today is another NHL Power Rankings, this time Week 5/November 8th, 2018. Want to figure out who's bottom 5? Want to figure out who's top 5? Make sure you stick around to the end of the video. Now I'm going to come out and say that this week's Power Rankings are very, very interesting. There are a lot of bottom 5 teams that started to actually get some wins, so maybe rethink where I was putting these teams and how I really adjusted them. So this week's Power Ranking is going to be a little bit more unique compared to other weeks, especially in that bottom 10. It really shaped a lot, and it really changed a lot from last week. Now we're going to start off with the Florida Panthers at number 31. Right now they're at a 3-5-3 record, a -1 from last week. Now it's mainly because they were not able to play as many games as some others. I think they're at an NHL low 11 games played. So we haven't been able to see a lot of Florida, and I think that's why I mainly put them down, because some teams I think got ahead of them there. But with Florida, they're last in the Power Rankings. They also didn't play all that great. I didn't really see a lot of greatness in the Global Series in Sweden. And honestly, while I haven't played a lot of games, I really haven't seen greatness and what I'm excited to see in the games that they've played. At number 30, this may surprise a ton of people, but I got the New Jersey Devils at number 30. 6-6-1 record. They're a -16 from last week. One of the biggest drop-offs that I think we've seen in this Power Rankings yet. And I think it's one main reason is that really everywhere you looked in this past week for New Jersey, it has been failing on all levels for them. I haven't liked the goaltending. It's been very, very inconsistent. Schneider hasn't looked good. Kincaid has looked pretty atrocious. The defense has been pretty meh. And offense, guys like Taylor Hall are trying to finally get going, but the depth is pretty much non-existent. At number 29, I have the St. Louis Blues. Right now, they're at a 5-5-3 record. They're a -1 from last week. I did like their week. They got a couple of big wins for St. Louis and Carolina. But right now, I think some teams are still ahead of them in the Power Rankings and in the overall standings. So for me, I put them down one spot. But I think, honestly, the way they're playing right now is pretty solid. I think the St. Louis Blues are starting to finally get back on track, which is exactly what they need. At number 28, I have the LA Kings. Right now, they're a 5-8-1 record, a plus from last week. I think they're last place in last week's Power Rankings, so it was only going to get up from here for the LA Kings. Of course, they fired John Stevens, they hired Willie Desjardins, and he got a big win versus Anaheim in his debut with LA's head coach. So I think LA is kind of on the right track here, and after an abysmal start, I think it was only going to get better from here. So it's going to be interesting to see how LA plays, but in the last week, I think they've been playing better, which is key for LA if they want to be even close to the playoffs. At number 27, I have the Detroit Red Wings. Right now, they're a 5-8-2 record, a +2 from last week, and this was a surprising week for the Detroit Red Wings. They had that 3-game winning streak. They're really on a much better track now, and this past week was one of the few weeks for Detroit that it hasn't been absolutely terrible. So I think right now they're starting to finally judge us a little bit. They're still not the greatest team in the world. We obviously know that, but in the last week, they've improved a lot, and of course, the goaltending has stepped up pretty big, most notably Jimmy Howard. At number 26, I have the Vegas Golden Knights, which hurts me to put them this low, of course. Right now, they're at a 6-8-1 record. They're a -3 from last week. I thought that win versus Carolina was going to be big for them, and of course, they lay a stinker in Toronto. Honestly, with Vegas, they've just been playing like I thought they would have played last year, like an expansion team, not being able to get wins, not being able to play all that well. They've been kind of slow, they've been kind of non-energetic, and to me, Vegas is just not the team that I was watching a year ago. With me, I'm kind of just disappointed in Vegas' play so far, and of course, this week I think represents that pretty thoroughly. At number 25 are the Ottawa Senators. Right now, they're a 6-6-3 record, a -1. But what a week from Ottawa's perspective. They got leaked in that Uber video, that whole drama around that, and it's been a pretty wacky and crazy week for Ottawa in the past week, and they've been decent. They, of course, went on that weird losing streak, and then they had that gigantic win versus New Jersey, that huge blowout after that Uber incident, which I think is pretty interesting. Ottawa having that great blowout win, that great win, I think honestly that's good for them, and of course going after this, who knows if they were able to get some momentum after that Uber incident, maybe they start winning games, who knows, but to me Ottawa had a weird week, and especially with that Uber incident, it was kind of a drama-filled week, but that win versus New Jersey was seriously important for their future if they want to compete in this season. At number 24, I have the Anaheim Ducks. Right now, they're at a 7-7-3 record, a +2 from last week. They got a couple of big wins for Columbus and Calgary, so they're playing decent. I still don't think they're playing all that great. I still think that John Gibson is being an absolute beast. Still, right now, John Gibson is one of the MVPs in my opinion, but Anaheim is slowly playing just a little bit better, not the greatest. Still, they're finding a little bit more luck, but to me right now, Anaheim is still playing like a bottom feeder, even if they're getting results. As number 23, I have the Chicago Blackhawks. Right now, they're a 6-6-3 record. They're a -6 from last week, and depending on who you ask, it was one of the worst weeks in Chicago Blackhawks franchise history. Of course, they fired Joel Quenneville, which just shook up that whole franchise, I feel, and the fans, of course. That's an unfortunate situation. And then you got the Chicago Blackhawks, just placement in the standings right now. They lost 5 straight. They're back at a .500 record after having a pretty decent start. So for me right now, Chicago is at a crossroads. They can either go down from here or they can go up, and I feel like Chicago is in a weird spot to where they could do both. Chicago is going to be really interesting in the next couple of weeks, especially with their new coach, but for right now, that last week was as abysmal as it gets. As number 22, I have the New York Rangers. Right now, they're one of the more interesting teams in the NHL. They're at a 7-7-1 record. They're a +5 from last week, but they had a 5-game winning streak during last week, which just blew my mind for New York. They beat some decent teams. They beat up on some lesser teams. But for New York, they're supposed to be the team that get beat up on, not the team that beat up other people. And for me right now, New York is kind of playing their best hockey of the season. We'll see if that translates into the rest of the season. But for me right now, New York, I think, deserves to be higher than they usually have because of how well they played. And even though they haven't played like the best team every night, they're finding ways to win, which is important, of course. At number 21, I have the Philadelphia Flyers. Right now, they're a 7-7-1 record. They're a +4 from last week. I've seen better things from Philadelphia. They still obviously need to improve on their record and improve on their play, but I've seen some games that gave me a little bit of hope on Philadelphia. Now, that game versus Arizona was very good for them. They got some goaltending, they got some offense, and that's what they needed to really propel themselves. For Philadelphia, they've been really inconsistent throughout this whole year, and they can finally start to get a groove here in the next couple of weeks. This will definitely help their season and get them on the right track. At number 20, I have the Buffalo Sabres. Right now, they're a 7-6-1 record, a +1 from last week. With Buffalo, they've had some good games, they've had some bad ones. They've been inconsistent in the last couple of weeks, and I've liked overall what I've seen from Buffalo this season compared to last, of course. But for Buffalo, if they want to be a true playoff contender, they got to finally get some winning streaks going. They can't get these inconsistent weeks here. They finally got to get going and get on a roll. And for Buffalo, they have some fundamental problems, but to me, I still think they're a pretty decent team. Right now, I think they're playing like a decent team. I just don't think they're getting the results they want. At number 19, I have the Carolina Hurricanes. Right now, they're a 6-7-2 record, a -6 from last week, and man, what a fall from grace the Carolina Hurricanes have had. They lost 5 straight games. They've looked like the team that they've been playing like before. They look like the team that was first in the Metropolitan Division, but they just are not getting results, whether it be through goaltending or unluckiness, power play incompetence. Carolina Hurricanes, I still think, are playing like a decent team. They're shooting a ton of shots. They're playing very, very solid, but they're just not getting the results right now, and that just happens. Sometimes teams get unlucky, but I think for right now, Carolina is getting on the short end of that, and this losing streak, I don't think it's because of Carolina's play. I think it's just really attributed to goaltending and, of course, unluckiness. Next up at number 18, I have the Colorado Avalanche. They're at a 7-5-3 record, a -7 from last week. And man, what a week from them, and not in a good way. They were a part of some crazy games. That 6-5 win for the Calgary Flames, that 7-6 Vancouver Canucks win for them, and of course last night they lost versus the Predators again. For me, Colorado is playing like I thought they would. They are getting a little bit of depth scoring now, but really, if they can't rely on that first line, they really don't have a lot of other forwards other than that to really carry the load. At number 17, I have the Dallas Stars. Right now they're at an 8-6-1 record. They're a +5 from last week, and it's mainly because they played a lot better. In this last week, they've been on this huge road trip, which I thought was going to be disastrous for them. They were terrible. I mean, they were 0-3 going in this road trip on the road, so I really didn't have too much expectations, but they did play pretty solid. They got quite a few points, and for me, Dallas, I think, is playing decent, especially with Alex Radulov out in the last few games. They've really needed him, and having him out is huge for this team, and they've still been able to get some wins there, which I think is important. And for Dallas, they're now coming back home, which is going to be huge for them, and of course, they can get some home wins. Hopefully, they'll come up in the standings and come up in the power rankings. At number 16, I have the Vancouver Canucks. Right now, they're at a 9-6-1 record, a +0 from last week. They were 16 in last week's power rankings. And to me, I've seen what I've seen from Vancouver really since the start of the season. They're a very solid offensive team. Elias Pettersson is freaking amazing, of course. They've had some injuries. Brock Besser, I think, is injured for today's game, for the next game, something like that. And they've had some key injuries on that team, like Alex Edler, and I think Tannen was injured for a bit of that last week. So for Vancouver, they're a pretty interesting team on how well they've adapted so far. I still don't think that they're playing all too great. I think they're just finding ways to win. Of course, the goaltending has been iffy, but they've been finding ways to win again. And for Vancouver, while I'm not sure that will continue, I think they've played solid up to this point. At number 15, I have the Edmonton Oilers. Right now, they're at 8-6-1 record, a +3 from last week. And I like what I've seen from Edmonton. They lost against a couple of tough opponents. They lost against Washington. They lost against Tampa, which I think is forgivable. They're both pretty good teams. And they won versus teams that really are bottom feeder teams like Chicago, like Detroit. So for Edmonton, while it was a pretty wishy-washy week, I don't think that really I would put any of the blame on them, especially on the games that they lost for Washington versus Tampa. You'd like to see wins versus those teams, but I don't think it's needed to be a very good team. And for Edmonton, I still think they're in the middle of the pack right now. Sure, you'd like wins against those, but I don't think it's really needed. At number 14, I have the Columbus Blue Jackets. Right now, they're an 8-6-1 record, a +6 from last week, and it was a really weird week for them. I really liked what I was seeing for some of that. They lost versus Detroit, which was rough. They lost versus LA, which was rough. They lost versus the Ducks, which was rough. But I really liked what I saw from them in that Dallas game where they won 4-1. Of course, I got to see that game. I get to watch it, and of course, the Columbus Blue Jackets, I think, stomped the Dallas Stars pretty handily. So for me right now, I'm kind of iffy on Columbus because I predicted them to be very, very solid. But right now, I think they're playing just middle of the pack. At number 13, I have the Arizona Coyotes. They're at a 7-6-0 record, a +2 from last week, and Coyotes kept playing well. They got wins versus Tampa, they got wins versus Senators, they got wins versus Carolina. It was a rough game versus Philadelphia, but again, they had a winning streak going into that, so that's fine. But I think Arizona is still playing very, very well. They're playing solid, and they're playing like I predicted them to be playing, which is fast and entertaining hockey. And I really like what I've seen from Arizona Coyotes so far, and hopefully their winning continues, and hopefully they continue to play well. At number 13, I'm very high on them, and I'm hoping that they continue the winning that they've had before. At number 12, I have the Calgary Flames. Right now, they're a 9-6-1 record, a +0 from last week. Number 12 last week, this week at number 12 as well. And they had a 3-game winning streak. I think the last week during the power rankings, they looked pretty solid. And then they lost versus Anaheim, which you guys know already. If you lose versus Anaheim, it's a big no-no. And losing 3-2 while John Gibson was an absolute stud once again, really losing versus Anaheim is inexcusable. So while I did like Calgary's direction, I still think that this next week can also be very big for them as well. At number 11, I have the New York Islanders. Right now, they're an 8-4-2 record, a +8 from last week. They had that 5-game winning streak going in, and then they lost versus Montreal a couple of days ago, which was to be expected. When I said in that New York Islanders video that I produced a few days ago, New York is kind of getting really, really lucky, and they're not really playing like a top 10 team. So for me, I just had them just outside because I think the New York Islanders will start to come down to earth, especially in this next week, so watch out for that. But I think the New York Islanders have still been playing decent, but for right now, I feel like 11 is about as high as they'll go. At number 10, I have the Pittsburgh Penguins. Right now, they're a 6-5-3 record, a -7 from last week, and man, what a fall from grace for last week. I had them number 3 in last week's power rankings. I thought they were looking very good, and once I made those power rankings video, it seemed like Pittsburgh just flipped the switch, and they were automatically a worse team. They lost 5 straight games right now, and obviously with Pittsburgh, they've been on a terrible, terrible slump. Now, that's been contributed to the offense not really producing, the defense not being all too great, and of course the goaltending has been pretty sloppy. At number 9, I have the Montreal Canadiens. Right now they're at 8-5-2 record. They're +1 from last week, and they've been still playing pretty decent. They got in a couple of rough losses, of course. That rough loss was New York. Probably prevented them from being a little bit higher. But I've still liked what I've seen from Montreal just as an effort level. The defense kind of been a little bit more suspect this week, but I still think the goaltending has been pretty solid. For Montreal, they keep playing this way like they did the last couple of weeks. They'll be on track to make the playoffs, I think. And for Montreal, they've been a much better team than they were last year. Even though it wasn't the greatest week for Montreal, I still think they'd take that any day over last year's performance. At number 8, I have the Winnipeg Jets. Right now they're at an 8-5-1 record, a -1 from last week, and it's mainly because they didn't really play last week. They had the Global Series versus Florida. They won a game, they lost a game, but really didn't play too much from last week, and we haven't seen too much from them. I think they've only played 2 games since last week's power rankings, so I don't have much to judge on them. They won a game, they lost a game versus Florida. They're the number 31 in the power rankings, so you like to see 2 wins, but for Winnipeg, I still think they're in a pretty good place right now. At number 7, I have the Boston Bruins. Right now, they're at an 8-4-2 record, a -2 from last week. They got in a couple of big wins, but they got in a couple of big losses. I think it's mainly been contributed to the lack of depth offense in the last week. The first line is still absolutely rolling like it always has this season, but the depth scoring is kind of shored up, which I kind of expected going into this November. So for Boston, in this next week, it's going to be huge for them if they can get some more depth scoring. Guys like Backus and DeBrusk can maybe step up a little bit, because I think while Boston is a pretty decent team, if the first line is the only source of scoring, they're not going to be top 10 in my rankings for long. At number 6, I have the Minnesota Wild. They're at an 8-4-2 record, just like Boston, but they're a +3 from last week, unlike Boston. At number 6, I think the Minnesota Wild have been playing decent this past week. They got a couple of big wins, but a couple of big losses versus San Jose, most notably, versus Vancouver, most notably. But I think that they've been able to win very, very good games versus divisional opponents like St. Louis, like Colorado. And I feel like that'll definitely propel them in the standings if they're able to get wins versus division opponents, which I think is important for them, especially if they have any hopes of making the NHL playoffs. At number 5, I have the Washington Capitals. Right now, they're at a 7-4-3 record. They're a +3 from last week. And I've liked what I'm seeing from Washington. They got some big wins versus Edmonton Oilers versus the Pittsburgh Penguins. That Pittsburgh Penguins game, I think, propelled them pretty far in these rankings. But I've liked what Washington has been playing like in the past couple of weeks. I've liked their goaltending. It's gotten a little bit better since the start of the season. The offense is still pretty pristine. And I feel like Washington Capitals are playing Washington Capitals hockey, which is no surprise. At number 4, I have the San Jose Sharks. Right now, they're an 8-4-3 record. They're a +2 from last week, but I really like the games they played in the last week. There was that big loss versus Columbus, but they played pretty decent. And they had that big win versus Philadelphia and that big win versus Minnesota. I still think that the San Jose Sharks are playing like one of the best teams in the league. They just haven't been really getting elite results yet. I feel like that will eventually come in time. I feel like the depth is playing pretty solid. The Stars are doing okay, and for me, the goaltending is still the biggest issue with Martin Jones. He hasn't played up to what I thought he was going to be, but right now, I still think the San Jose Sharks are playing like one of the better teams in the NHL. While they're not getting the results like a Tampa Bay or Nashville, I still think that they're playing very, very good. At number 3, I have the Toronto Maple Leafs. Right now, they're at a 10-5-0 record. They're a +1 from last week. They had 2 big wins versus Pittsburgh, which Pittsburgh was, again, during the slump, they were kind of playing not the greatest, but Toronto, a big win versus Pittsburgh, of course, a big win versus Vegas. The only game I think they lost during that week was against your Dallas Stars, so, again, that's pretty funny. They were the much better team in that game, so I'll give them a pass there. But I feel like Toronto is playing pretty good without Austin Matthews. They're finding ways to win now, and while it was a little bit rough in the first couple of games without Matthews, I feel like they're starting to finally adapt. And of course, even without Matthews, Toronto is still a pretty deadly team offensively, so to me, I didn't worry as much as some other people. And for the 3rd straight week, it's the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Nashville Predators fighting for that number 1 spot. Man, to me, there's been no better dominant teams than the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Nashville Predators. They've just been the classes of the NHL right now in the East and in the West, and they're both playing like the best in the world right now. But unfortunately, one team must go at number 2, and at number 2, I have the Tampa Bay Lightning. Right now, they're at 11-3-1 record, a +0 from last week. They've been number 2 for the past 2 weeks, and unfortunately, the other team at number 1 has been a little bit better than them. But for the Tampa Bay Lightning, they've had some big wins for some good teams, and to me, I have liked what I've seen from Tampa. That big win versus Ottawa, that huge Tampa Bay, that huge Braden Point goal, and then Yanni Gourde getting in overtime. I really like what I've seen from Tampa Bay and how they played offensively, defensively, and Andre Vasilevsky is finally starting to get on that groove, which is really needed for Tampa Bay if they want to be that President's Trophy winner. Now at number 1 for the 3rd straight week in a row, I have the Nashville Predators. Right now, they're at a 12-3-0 record, a +0 from last week and the last week. And to me, while Lightning were getting pretty close there, I don't think there's been a better team in the NHL than the Nashville Predators. They've just played unbelievable versus some very, very good teams, and they've been able to stomp on the smaller opponents that were not really pegged to beat them anyways. But the Nashville Predators, I feel like they've been the best team in the league, and I feel like that's been the case for the past 3 weeks. So yeah, while I could have made it more interesting by putting Tampa Bay or Toronto number 1, I felt like having Nashville's 3 straight weeks was the right idea, just because I think in the last 3 weeks, Nashville has been the best team in the NHL, hands down. But who knows, honestly, maybe at number 1 next week is a completely different team. The Nashville Predators play 3 games until next week's power rankings, so honestly, anything can happen between now and then. But of course, I want to hear your thoughts on this week's power rankings. Were you surprised by any of the teams and the listings here? What were your thoughts on the bottom 5, the top 5 in my power rankings, and of course, every team in between? And of course, I want to hear from you. What are your power rankings? And of course, who would be your number 1? Now, if you want some more GRAV goodness, you can watch this video where I talk about Joel Quenneville and which team will end up hiring him. But that's my video, guys. If you guys did enjoy, make sure you like and subscribe again. Tell me below your thoughts on my rankings and what your rankings are as well. I'll see you guys in the next video or stream. Goodbye.